From the Daily Mail, this is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Just weeks into the new semester, a crowd gathers around a tent emblazoned with the slogans, "The American Comeback" and "Prove Me Wrong."
That's a lot of people, Utah, I'll tell you what.
They are eager to hear what the speaker beneath it has to say. It's a typical university scene, with the promise of the exchange of ideas and debate, except in one way, its size. This speaker is Charlie Kirk, one of the most influential voices in President Donald Trump's Make America Great Again movement. And the event on Wednesday at Utah Valley University in Orem drew more than 3,000 people. Backpack-toting students watch from surrounding buildings as Kirk, wearing a white t-shirt that says "Freedom," tosses red MAGA hats, Frisbee style, to his fans.
Bring the best libs that Utah has to offer.
Shortly after noon, Kirk takes to the stage and begins taking questions as he settles into his zone of comfort, debating liberal ideas. By 12:20 p.m., he's deep into the Q&A session. He was asked,
"Do you know how many transgender Americans have been mass shooters over the last 10 years?
Too many."
Okay.
The questioner follows up.
It's 5. Okay, now 5 is a lot, right? I'm gonna give you some credit. Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America?
Kirk then asked,
"Counting or not counting gang violence?"
Great.
Suddenly, a single shot rings out. A sharp crack echoes across the campus. The calm turns to horror. Kirk slumps in his seat. Blood begins to pour out of his neck, and he falls out of the chair. It's clear that he's seriously wounded. Seconds later, screams ring out as people scramble for cover, scattering across the green lawns in blind panic. Some attendees dart to a nearby building and run through a water fountain to escape. Others duck and hide. Some drag their friends and even strangers to safety.
Everyone was just jumping on top of each other. No one was trying to get shot because no one knew if there was going to be more shots fired.
By 12:25 p.m., Kirk has been carried from the scene by his security detail and emergency responders. He's taken to a nearby hospital where, a short time later, he's pronounced dead.
He was a faithful man that brings me a lot of comfort, Glenn. I feel like he's home with his maker.
He is home, and there is a celebration on the other side, bringing him home.
I'm totally neutral, moderate, but you can always argue, debate, and disagree with whoever, but I think it's completely wrong to shoot an individual.
At 4:40 p.m., Donald Trump pays tribute to Kirk in a post on his platform, Truth Social.
To my great fellow Americans, I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah.
So far, no suspect has yet been publicly named, and the manhunt continues. Earlier, the FBI said investigators had found a high-powered rifle in the woods and that they had images of a suspect who appears to be college age. Today, the story of how Charlie Kirk, a 31-year-old grassroots conservative activist, became a close ally of President Trump, amassed billions of views on social media, and brought millions of young Americans into the Republican Party, and the manhunt for his assassin. From the Daily Mail, this is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I'm Germania Poleo. So today we're going to be talking with Jack Anderton. He's one of millions of young people who have been inspired by Charlie Kirk. But Jack, please tell us about your work and who you are a little bit.
My name, obviously, is Jack Anderton. I am 24 years of age. I live in London, but I'm originally from Liverpool. And I am a political consultant and political commentator. And I have for the last couple of years spoken out about issues on immigration and crime and justice and issues that I really care about. And obviously in the context of Charlie, he was someone that had huge influence online, and definitely someone that I would sort of look to see how and why and what he was doing.
Right, and obviously we're going to talk about the horrifying events that happened on Wednesday a bit later. But I understand that you actually met Charlie, Jack, as in one of these tours that he has done to talk to young people all around the world. Tell us about this meeting.
Yeah, so I was invited to Cambridge as Charlie was speaking to the Cambridge Union, which is the University of Cambridge's free speech debating society. I think it's the oldest in the world. Started in the early 1800s. And he was giving an interview to the Cambridge Union, and then subsequently he was debating with students at the university. So I was invited by one of the university's professors, Professor James Orr, and it was a really interesting experience. I'd never been to a union before, whether that's the Oxford or the Cambridge Union, and the theatre was packed. I think they did actually end up having to turn people away because there just wasn't the space for everyone to be there. And Charlie, he's very tall. If you've ever met him, I think he's about 6'5", 6'6". So he's a very imposing presence, but at the same time very affable. And he started off, and I think he always sort of takes things in good faith. So when he was being interviewed by the Cambridge Union president, you could very obviously see that she was not a big fan of his and had maybe a slight bias towards him, but that didn't affect how he spoke with her. He still treated her with respect and kindness, and he really did sort of lead the room. And even when he might make some comments that perhaps some of your viewers or listeners might find outrageous, he would always say it with seriousness. And even if half of the room did laugh, he'd then carry on and push through and stick to his point.
So it's these debates that Charlie held with people who opposed his views that made him such a household name, that made him catch Trump's attention, and that people say helped Trump win the election. Explain to people who didn't know about Charlie what the format of these events were, right? He just kind of sat there and said, "Come prove me wrong." Explain how that worked.
So essentially, what happened is Charlie Kirk founded an organization called Turning Point USA, which is a student-focused organization. I think it was high schools, colleges, and university campuses. And essentially, what Charlie did was tour, more specifically America, but in later years, Britain and other countries. But he toured across America, visiting these campuses, and basically sort of set up a table and set up a few cameras around, and essentially said, I'm a conservative, or I'm right wing. Come and debate me. Come and ask me questions. And those clips were disseminated across the internet and social media. So recently, in recent years, it's been TikTok. I think he has something like 7 million followers on TikTok, and probably hundreds of millions, if not billions, of views and likes. And the short form clips of him debating predominantly left-wing students and professors went, completely viral, and that really skyrocketed him in terms of the American right media landscape, and he was one of the most famous figures.
Jack, tell us a little bit about the controversial side of his views, because, of course, after the tragedy that has happened, we are seeing all sorts of talk. And as you mentioned, these viral clips, I've seen one going around where he, for example, is talking about his views on abortion. So tell us a little bit what Charlie Kirk's views were.
Well, I think his views were, quite sort of mainstream American conservatism, which we might not understand if you're, for a British listener, because the movements are quite different in America and Britain. But he was obviously anti-abortion. He was pro-life. He was pro-gun. Very much mainstream views for your average American conservative. And he would tell you exactly the same thing. He would, I think, describe himself, not as particularly radical. He wanted to return, to a civil society, and one where, both sides respected each other, and one where both sides listened to one another's views. And I think his argument was that recently, the last sort of decade or so, America as a country had become intolerant to the types of viewpoints that he was expressing.
So tell me, because we have seen how President Trump has reacted to this political assassination, and we know that Trump has now moved from speaking from speaking to traditional media to now relying on people like Charlie Kirk, these podcasts, these young people. How influential was Charlie Kirk with Gen Z that really apparently a lot of Gen Z supports Trump, and Trump himself has credited people like Charlie Kirk for that. Tell us how important Charlie Kirk was to Trump's election.
So at the dinner in Cambridge, I asked Charlie about this because obviously it's something I'm particularly interested in. And he was very modest. He was incredibly modest, actually, and didn't really want to take the credit. But if you read the New York Times, they have actually reported that Trump, at a private event, gave credit to Charlie Kirk for the surge in younger voters that helped him ultimately win the 2024 election. So it's pretty safe to say that Donald Trump perhaps would not have won that election if it hadn't been for Charlie Kirk and Turning Point Action, which was his organization that spent millions and millions of dollars and hired, I think, about 1,000 staff to sign up and register younger voters on campuses. So that was part of the campus tour. It wasn't just to go and debate, it was also to sign up potential voters who would then vote for conservative leaders and ultimately Donald Trump.
And Trump himself, in perhaps in an it's not like Trump to give credit to a lot of people, but he has given lots of credit to Charlie Kirk, right? What has Trump said about this?
Trump has basically called Charlie Kirk a very close friend. Charlie Kirk originally began working for Donald Trump Jr. In 2015, 2016, during Trump's first or second presidential run, depending on which one you want to count.
We have to mention when Charlie Kirk was still 18 years old. Like, this is when it all started.
Yeah, 18, 19, 20, I think he was. He's been really a part of the American right and the Trump movement ever since he was 19 years of age. So he's been around for almost the entire decade of Trump and MAGA. And he has built great friendships with Trump's family, not just Trump himself. And they really valued him as an individual to the point where he actually played a part in picking Trump's cabinet picks and cabinet staff. And for someone of his age is an extraordinary achievement.
Wow. Yeah, I've been seeing reports today from CNBC journalist that said he received a call from Trump, and Trump said that he believed Charlie Kirk could have been president. So those are rare words from Trump. But let's talk a little bit. We know how influential Kirk was in the US. But tell me about this movement in the UK, because as someone who understands American politics, and I'm not so clear on English politics, I'm wondering how some of his views, like, super pro guns and Second Amendment, how does that translate to the UK movement that follows Charlie Kirk? Or is it more focused, on his idea of freedom of speech rather than like the specific policies? Tell me about the people who admire Charlie Kirk in the UK.
Well, I think from a British perspective, Charlie Kirk was only really getting started here. There is a Turning Point contingent in Britain called Turning Point UK. But again, that's quite small. It isn't really very well established, and it doesn't really have the power or influence that Turning Point USA has. And in terms of specific issues and specific policy, I think what Charlie Kirk has done is he has opened up debate on those issues that perhaps we maybe don't talk about in Britain. For example, abortion. Abortion is pretty much a settled issue in this country.
Right.
So I think what he would say, and what Turning Point would say, is that they are opening up British young people to discussions that they perhaps have not heard before, which I think is only a good thing. So definitely the perspective of Charlie and Turning Point as a sort of free speech organization, especially in the context of the threat to free speech in Britain today with Lucy Connolly and the online safety bill. It's never been so important to fight and stand up for freedom of speech.
For these young people from the UK, how did they react to this murder? How do they feel about the future of this movement they believe in?
Well, I can only speak for people that I know and young people around me, and it's shocking. It's not something that particularly you would ever have expected. He's not an elected politician. He has been very brave in what he's done, but he's never held elected office, and he is, to a lot of young people, just someone that they see on TikTok and someone that they've listened to, at their university campus. So the reaction to this has been one of utter shock, but also a reflection on, people that I know in the media and in politics on their own security, and the fact that if something like this can happen to Charlie, then perhaps the rest of us maybe need to take more care of what we do and who we speak to and where we are.
Wow. Now we're going to discuss what actually happened. This assassination that has really, concerned the entire world, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. We talked about what Charlie did at universities, and that's what he was doing at Utah Valley University yesterday. Walk us through this process. I've seen some videos, Charlie gets there, the crowd is pumped, he's wearing a freedom shirt, he starts throwing t-shirts. It's like a party event that perhaps you don't see in traditional conservatism, and that's probably his success. Tell me what Charlie Kirk was doing when someone took his life on Wednesday.
His visit to Utah University was part of his American Comeback Tour, which was a tour around different university campuses. And apparently there were 3,000 attendees for this event, which is just enormous. If you think about the context of that. And it was an outside event. And essentially what happens is Charlie and his team pitch up, they set up sort of a tent on campus with a chair and a few cameras, and they have a microphone in which members of the audience can come up and they can just ask Charlie and debate questions using this microphone, and Charlie will then respond. And the audience will laugh, they'll cheer, they'll boo. All in all, it's quite a fun time, I think, for everyone involved, or for most people involved. And unfortunately, at this event, it appears that as Charlie began talking about gun violence and gun deaths, someone decided to gun him down as well.
That's one of the interesting things about all of this, right? One of the main topics Charlie Kirk discussed was gun violence. Tell us more a little bit about that last exchange that he had. I heard some people were also saying it was about shootings committed by transgender people.
So I think that was a part of it. Yes. So it has been a discussion over the last couple of months on the American right that there seems to be a theme with certain shooters and in terms of the fact that they are transgender, and that was part of the conversation. And then Charlie was also speaking about gun deaths in terms of gang violence. And then as soon as he lowered the microphone, the bullet was fired.
So just to go back a little bit, it's usually a liberal that sits in the chair to debate Charlie Kirk. Is that how it often goes?
A liberal or sort of a left winger, yes. It's usually a student. There have been times when it's been a professor or just sort of a member of the public walking past, but it's usually a very excitable left winger in the chair.
Jack, I also want to discuss, because this is something that was going on when I was in college 10 years ago. A lot of conservative speakers people stage protests when they go to speak at university campus. And this also happened with Charlie Kirk a lot. In fact, there was a petition trying to ban him from campus before he went to this Utah University. Tell us a little bit about that pushback that not only Charlie Kirk, but conservative speakers at large face at college campuses.
So it's been a general theme in America and Britain over the last sort of decade or so, which is that conservatives and right-wingers don't seem to be welcome on university campuses. As you've just said, there are protests. There've even been sort of violent riots at certain universities. Doors have been barricaded. Speakers aren't allowed in. The universities themselves cancel talks on the day. So they make it incredibly difficult for right-wingers and conservatives to actually come and speak to students on these campuses. And I think what Charlie was very successful at was that he never sort of gave up, and he was always willing to do what was necessary to speak to people. at every university that he was invited to.
Right. And it's important to note that there didn't appear to be any type of security at this event. However, there's been reports that Charlie traveled with personal security. Did you see any of that when you met him, or was he basically anyone could approach him?
So he did have his personal security with him when he was in Britain. I think at the event there were 6 police officers at the rally at the university. But yes, in terms of the 3,000 people versus 6 police officers, that's nowhere near enough to make sure that somebody is entirely safe.
So obviously, as we sit here, we do not know who the gunman is. We don't know what their motives were. But what do you think, Jack? And what is the conservative movement thinking? Who could have done this and why?
Well, I think the understanding, I mean, we'll have to wait and see, is that this is a left-wing attack against someone who was one of the most famous conservative voices and faces in the country. And like I say, we will have to wait and see. But I think what is clear is that Charlie Kirk represented a conservatism that was respectful, that was willing to have conversations, that was willing to debate. And perhaps we might see the reaction from this is a reaction that is perhaps darker, perhaps more ruthless, and one that will not accept conservative voices and conservative faces being gunned down.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about next. We have seen several incidents of political violence in the US just over the last year. Of course, even President Trump was almost killed
Yeah.
at a rally. We have had an assassination of a Democratic lawmaker. There was an attempted assassination of the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania. Where do we go from here? It seems, do you see this as the ultimate escalation? People are comparing today to the 1960s and the Kennedy's assassination, Martin Luther King assassination. What's going to happen here?
I think time will tell. I think, you cannot have a country that can peacefully coexist when you have one side of the country that thinks the other side is completely evil and irredeemable. That's not how you build a civil or safe society. And ultimately, it depends on political leaders, and it depends on your average person, on whether this development and this mood and this sort of atmosphere in the country can be quelled or at least calmed, or whether it only escalates from here. I think the reaction that we've seen from many conservative leaders is that actually, this is a line in the sand, and they're not going to continue allowing incidents like this to take place.
What does this mean for the future of this new media ecosystem that Charlie Kirk helped create? We have people like Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson is now a podcaster as well, Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly broke down live as she learned of Charlie's death. How do you think this will affect that new media ecosystem? Will these people be intimidated? Will they change how they do things? Do you think they're scared? Will they be more careful? Where do they go from here?
I think what's important to note is a lot of the people you've just mentioned actually got their start with Charlie Kirk, and he helped elevate a lot of those people. I mean, Candace Owens was very close with him at one point with Turning Point USA. So what you will see, I believe, is people actually rallying around each other, and you will only see this new media ecosystem grow, because ultimately it is where a lot of the news is happening and a lot of the news is breaking. And conservatives and right wing already have a distrust of sort of mainstream establishment media, and they're only being pushed to these other types of platforms and podcasts and shows. So that media ecosystem will only grow. It's lost a huge voice yesterday in Charlie Kirk, but I'm sure that space will be filled by his friends and his colleagues.
Are you concerned a lot, especially about young men being radicalized by this? Because Charlie always said, what I'm doing is the alternative to revolution. I'm sitting here debating to try to prevent the alternative, which is, he would say something like, bad things happen when people stop having a dialogue. Are you concerned in any way that this assassination is going to radicalize a new generation of right wing young men?
Well, that's what I hinted at earlier, which is that the reaction to this might be something of more of a darkness and more of a ruthlessness. Charlie Kirk has influenced, millions of young people. And it's whether they choose to abide by his method of debate and conversation, or whether they choose to, use perhaps government power to ensure that incidents like this don't happen again.
What do you say to all the people, and I'm sure you've seen it, we've written about it here at the Daily Mail, that have had really horrible things to say immediately after this political assassination, even comparing Charlie Kirk with Hitler, saying, basically celebrating the death or using the opportunity to bring up his Second Amendment right opinions. What would you say to those people that believe Charlie Kirk, was a Hitler of our times, basically? That's what they're saying.
I would say they should have respect for his wife and his two daughters who are currently mourning the loss of their father and their husband.
Right. And finally, Jack, what do you think this will mean for this movement in the UK? How widespread are the news? Do you think this will help really bring it to the next level? How will this affect the UK? Because here in the States, I mean, I feel like we're a little farther in that polarization, perhaps. Like we are already at the level where most people can't speak to each other. How far along in the UK are you in that process? And do you think this will affect the situation in any way?
Well, I think it all depends on what happens over the next few years in terms of our politics. But currently we have a party, Reform UK, that is the highest rated party. If you look at the polling, I think a new poll came out, it's 34%. And its leader, Nigel Farage, gave a tribute to Charlie Kirk today in the House of Commons. So it all depends on whether this energy can be channeled into political action and a political movement. And currently, I think it can, actually. So at the next election, I think incidents like this will be remembered by voters as a sort of tipping point, because free speech is important, and having the ability to converse and debate with people in a civilized manner is what Britain has been about, and what helped to create what I think is one of the greatest countries in the world.
Jack, it's crazy that one of the last topics Charlie was speaking up about was the murder, the stabbing murder that was recorded on surveillance footage on a North Carolina train of a Ukrainian refugee by a career criminal. Charlie was speaking about that several times a day before he was killed. It's wild that just a day after he was talking about this, he too was killed on video. Horrific videos are being shared online, just how they're being shared about of the Ukrainian girl's murder. What does this mean for our modern world, that we are not safe in public spaces anymore, at least in the US? How do you guys see that in the UK? I mean, I'm sure as people who are not as armed as Americans are, it has to be shocking to just see filmed assassinations, and they have become very common. In fact, just this week, we are mourning Charlie Kirk and this Ukrainian woman who was just going about her day and was murdered. What do you think of that?
Well, what you've seen in America and in Britain is a enormous rise in just sort of utter lawlessness. It seems that the police and the justice system actually don't have control over what's happening in our country. The example of the Ukrainian refugee, the criminal that ended up murdering her on the bus, I believe had been released by a judge in the area. And it's cases like that where the safety of the majority has been ignored for the rights of I was going to say a minority, but of one individual in that case. He was allowed out onto the street and subsequently killed a woman because of his right to be released, that was sanctioned by a judge. And cases like this are increasingly common, and the public are absolutely right to be concerned that them, their children, their families are not safe out in the streets. And it will take a crackdown and a serious government in America and here to rectify that situation.
And of course, I think the fact that the public has been so aware of these incidents will probably affect how they vote, no?
Absolutely. I think you will only see polling rise for Trump in this situation, and also for right-leaning parties in this country, probably most likely Reform UK.
Thank you so much, Jack, for that insight, and best of luck as you continue promoting healthy, peaceful debate across the pond.
Thank you very much.